Broad Street Review podcast is an extension of Broad Street Review, Philly's home for arts, culture, and conversation, an online arts and culture journal covering the greater Philadelphia area. I'm your host, Darnell Radford.
Today on the podcast, BSR Editor-in-Chief Alaina Johns and contributor Josh Herron take over the podcast to talk about Theater Exile's production, PhillyGRIT, a pirate, a schoolgirl, and a good person, on stage through May 19th. Here is today's interview with BSR Editor-in-Chief Alaina Johns and contributor Josh Herron.
Hello, I am Alaina Johns. We are excited to have you with us on the BSR podcast today. I am the editor-in-chief at Broad Street Review, and I am here with one of my fellow BSR critics, and I will hand it over to him to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Josh Herron. I am a critic at Broad Street Review. When I am not doing that, I am an elementary school teacher in the city of Philadelphia, and I am the host of the currently hiatus Chosen by Committee, which is a podcast where myself and two other friends try to read through every play that has ever won a Pulitzer, starting at 1918.
Wow.
Made it to the 1980s. So we have 20 more years to go.
Amazing. And you also are on Instagram, right? Do you want to drop your handle?
Oh, yes. I'll do my professional one, which is Theater Guy Josh. That is theater with an R-E because old habits die hard.
Gotcha. All right. Theater Guy Josh. So let's say real quick an overview of what it is that we've done here. So this is a theater series now running at Theater Exile through May 19th. It's called PhillyGRIT, and it's actually a trio of solo shows by Philly women artists. The first one is called Johnny Depp, a retrospective on late stage capitalism, and this is by Jenna Kuerzi and Dunn. The second show is called Catholic Guilt, and it's by Kelly McCaughan. Am I saying that right?
That sounds right.
Okay. Apologize to Kelly if we butcher the pronunciation of your name. The third one is Good Person, and this is a show by Brett Ashley Robinson. They're all about an hour long. So what Josh and I decided we would do, since Theater Exile was mixing up the end of their season, instead of presenting one full end of season production, they're bringing together these three artists and mounting these three solo shows. We thought, well, this is cool. Let's go and be in the room together at opening night of all three shows, 3 nights in a row, and then get together in this podcast space and talk about what that experience was. Hopefully, well, when this is in your ears, you'll still have time to get tickets to the shows and check them out yourself. Do you want to add anything, Josh, about that?
Oh, it's been a fun experience. I don't know the last time I've done 3 nights in a row. It gave me a lot of respect for the New York critics who have just had to do 19 openings in 10 days or something. Yeah. Our little taste of it felt rich enough.
Yeah, it reminds me my younger days as a theater critic before I was an editor, and I sometimes was seeing 3, 4, 5 shows a week on top of working a different job full time and doing the writing. So yeah, it was a lot.
I do like it. Actually, the last time I've done this is when Fringe or Theater Week happens, and there's this sort of buzz. It's something that is so special when you can you feel like you're in sort of a festive mood and able to see a bunch of stuff and be filled with ideas and be sort of immersed in all that creativity.
Yeah, and all the sort of local friends and colleagues that you meet, on the scene. It's fun. Do we want to jump into the shows individually?
Yeah,
okay, so let's jump into Johnny Depp, a retrospective on late stage capitalism. And this was interesting because Jenna has been doing this for a long time, right? And I think that, was it last 2023 last spring or summer, she mounted it in Philadelphia and said that this is the last time the show is going to be up. But now it's back for PhillyGRIT. Do you want to start? Did you like this show? What are your thoughts?
Well, I was really excited. This is probably the one I was most excited for because I had missed it in the last couple fringes and I didn't make it to the last time it was at Fergie's, and it sounded something that was like very up my alley. I'm a movie person. I like bad movies. I like camp. And it sort of felt like it scratched all those itches. And I will say, I do feel the artist was going to put it to bed last year. And it sort of feels like maybe that would have been, this sounds so harsh, but like the right decision. It feels like the show is sort of like, I don't know if it's aged super well or if it just feels like it's like from a slightly different time. But it felt very sort of worn and practiced. And I didn't leave opening night feeling like a super energized feeling of watching someone doing something they really loved that was really vital. I don't know. Have you seen this before?
No, I had not. It had been on my radar. I know when Cameron Kelsall, another BSR critic, reviewed it last year, he was a big fan. So I had been excited to see it, and I was glad to get the chance on this series. And I do get what you're saying about the show. Does feel very sort of practiced, very well lived in. I don't have the sense of something fresh. Jenna, also, I can tell she's a consummate pro with the audience. And I love the interactions that she does. And some of the funniest stuff came out of those face-to-face individual questions with the audience. Like, I love the section where she goes through and just throws out there, like, everyone on the spot has to say what they remember about the original Pirates of the Caribbean movie. And the stuff that comes out from that is funny. And I love her takes on Tim Burton when she describes the scraggle trees of Tim Burton in the audience, all makes their arms in the shape of the scriggle. Like, everyone just immediately gets it and they all do it together. We talk about Tim Burton's colorless films full of sad pale boys on sad pale adventures. And I think it's funny, but also those darker pieces of the show are landing for me about going down these rabbit holes about Depp's behavior and what he's earning on these movies and what our complicity is in the audience in the whole issue, and also digging into issues of abuse, which will resonate really strongly with anyone who's been through similar behavior. And I've sat through it in the theater many times unpacking this stuff, and it always is tough.
Yeah. I think I was struck by is how much. So Theater Exile is a really lovely theater space. It's like one of the only theaters in South Philadelphia. As someone who lived in South Philadelphia for over a decade, I find it to be a vital place. And it's in a really nice new building. You go downstairs, it's in a basement. It actually came up in the third show that it's next to a childcare center, but that doesn't really seem to. But it's sort of like a black box, and it's very theatery. You go through a lobby, and you're in rows, and they left the house lights on for this. But I couldn't help but think like how much more I would have enjoyed this at a bar, or at least it just felt brighter or more lived in or more naturally sort of social. And with a crowd that maybe wasn't theater subscribers. Because I think it's a play that benefits from a little bit of self-selection of people who know Johnny Depp, people who sort of know Jenna, people who know they're getting into it. I got the sense that it wasn't necessarily the case. You know, there's this moment early on in the show where Jenna asks everyone to name, like the first thing we do actually is we name our favorite Johnny Depp movie. And the first person that sort of looks like, and just like, oh, we'll just say Pirates. And as we're going through the theater, where there probably was like maybe 40, 50 people, I would say about over half sort of seemed like they didn't really know. They landed on Pirates. You know, it was like half that, and then half had some sort of the more major works. There wasn't any like Depp heads. It felt like the audience might have been a little lost. The one Depp head, there was a heckler, maybe. But I'm wondering too, as you're saying this, right, this idea of complicity, if it doesn't quite land, if we're in a room full of people who are sort of ambivalent about this person, and the whole trick of the show is you're giving this guy so much money and he's a bad person. And we're all sort of like, well, we don't really care about him. I don't know. It didn't like, there was like a punch that was supposed to happen that I don't think landed, that I think was not necessarily the fault of the writing or the performance, but a result of sort of the audience. And I'm wondering if that has not been the experience performing this in other venues.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah. Sort of tell early on, I felt like when she was doing that first round, she was like, I was like, oh shit, I don't know how far these people are going to be able to go with me.
The Theater Exile opening night subscribers, like maybe they're not the crowd for this show. I'm not a huge movie person myself. I'm also not like a big Johnny Depp fan or hater. I'm just sort of, indifferent. But I like Jenna and I like solo theater and especially women artists.
That's an interesting thread. I actually don't love solo theater.
Yeah, that's valid.
I don't dislike it, but it's not my favorite type. So that's really interesting.
I think that on my side, it may not necessarily be that I'm especially excited about, solo theater as a medium versus others. I think what maybe gets me excited is that is the medium that a lot of artists are working in who can't get their work fully produced and they're on a shoestring. And the way that they can do it is a solo show that they are starring as. The solo shows are the chance to see those ideas and see that work, particularly from artists that, aren't able to break through for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think solo theater for me can be, I feel like it sort of has a couple different options, right? Where it's like sort of a lecture, like a fun lecture on a topic, and we're going to learn a lot, and there'll be some sort of interaction. There's a stand-up routine where you're sort of talking about personal experiences often, or you're playing a character. I think what I miss is like theater for conflict. I like theater for plots and character and some sort of world building. And I think that can be hard in a one-person show. I actually think, we saw a little bit of all three actually over the three shows. And it's not like it's like strictly one or the other. I think they blend, but I am a fan of plays. I like a world and a character, and I think that can be sort of hard in one-person shows. But I really like what you're saying about the vehicle for like ideas to gestate. And I think they did a really good job of curation, that all three have clear topics, clear points of view, and really interesting ways of conveying those.
Shall we transition and talk about the middle show, Catholic Guilt?
Absolutely.
Cool. So this show is by someone who grew up Catholic and went to Catholic school all the way up until she started college. The show is about a lot of really messy, difficult, poignant, funny things about that. And I wanted to ask really quick, how does this material resonate with you or not personally? What's your faith experience? How does that plug in for you?
Yeah. So I'm not a Catholic girl. I'm Jewish. And I was raised, it's called Reconstructionist Judaism. So it's sort of like the hippiest, lightest sort of touch. I was bar mitzvahed. I would go to high holidays. I went to Hebrew school, but I would not say that like a strict literal adherence to like any sort of scripture was ever been my experience. It's really like, I feel like for me, Judaism is really cultural. We saw it with my mom, who also not Catholic, very much.
Yeah.
And she had a hard time relating to it, which I found very strange, because I just feel like Catholicism is just, the experience is so no. I have friends who went to Catholic school. I had seen enough movies and film, and I live in Philadelphia. I just feel like nothing felt out of reach.
Sort of like if you've seen half of American horror movies, you know something about Catholicism, right?
Right. I really love when something is so sort of specific to one person's experience that it actually is able to be universal, right? I think she does that very well. I think she really like hones in on her specific experiences and is able to really mine them for meaning in a way that like allows us to attach our own stuff to that or find resonances with us. I didn't go to Catholic school, but I certainly was at middle school dances. And
yeah, right. Yeah. I'm not Catholic either. I am not any faith, but I was raised Christian in a kind of small, wacky sect of Christianity known as Swedenborgianism, which has its own whole lore in the Philadelphia area. My family is from that church. But anyway, so I related really hard to a lot of what Kelly describes in the story. And I mean, I had to go to chapel 5 days a week, every morning before school, religion class every day, church on Sunday. It really drenched my life for 20 plus years. And that experience, being called into the principal's office and having in my case, I was wearing shorts on a 90-degree day in a school building that had no air conditioning, and being sent home to change because the denim shorts I were wearing were too short. Even though I'm not Catholic, my experience was so similar. There's a lot of things I liked about this show, including the design and the projections. I thought were really wonderful. We can shout out here, this was drafted by Kyle Metzger, and projection design by Chris Carcione, videography by Matt Kepler, technical design by James Jackson and Daniel Eisen, choreography by Chelsea Murphy. I love the visuals on this and the integration of the visuals and sound. Do you have thoughts on that?
I thought they were great. Without spoilers, the ending, some really great projections and really
absolutely
sort of an ecstatic note that makes it feel very much like an event, and that's really fun. I think there's like a recurring sort of costuming joke that I think is delightful and serves also a dramaturgical purpose, so that's really fun. The show is about her experience growing up sort of young, from a little kid to young adulthood, with autism, and I think the tech sort of provides a nice through line because the tones of those moments can varies very widely, right? It can get very serious. Kelly has a really incredible sort of ability, I think, of going from very serious to very cartoony. Her face is very expressive, and she has a lot of control over that. And then also very vulnerable. She traffics in these different modes. Sometimes I felt like I was a little whiplash, like there's a really serious moment, and I almost would have preferred to like stand there in that discomfort a little bit longer. And I think that, and it's hard. It's a hard sell to like ask an audience to do that, and you also have to keep them engaged, I think.
Yeah, and it's just you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I like chuckled during Johnny Depp. I really laughed during the show. If Johnny Depp had an audience that wasn't necessarily all Johnny Depp fans, and maybe that struggled, Catholic Guilt had many people in the audience who were not Catholic. And I think she was really able to reach to them. There's a moment where she really breaks down, I think, and sort of really is like talking to the audience in this way that
it's very vulnerable.
Very vulnerable, and it seems like she got the audience to go there with her. And part of me almost wishes I loved the ending, but I wonder if you could have switched order around and ended with that, because I just found that so beautiful and powerful.
Yes, there are slapstick, funny, sexy elements to it, but also the thing that really lands for me is, and again, I think that folks should get tickets to all these shows and check them out. So I'm no spoilers, but the thing that really lands about the end with me is this sense that we might realize we want to distance ourselves from, say in this case, it's a childhood faith, but that also is like trying to turn your back on a younger version of yourself, which ultimately might not be possible. And we actually have to find a way to live with those different parts of ourselves, all of that, the trauma and the questioning and the freedom, it all is still there. It's not a tidy conclusion. And I feel like this show gets there.
There was a moment that gave me a bit of a like, and I'm curious if you felt that too. There's a moment where she brings an audience participant up and sort of engages in a very intimate.
Yeah.
And I think she picked the right person. I think they were very both game and sweet, but I'm not entirely sure that audience member knew what they were getting into. I'm just curious how that landed with you, the kind of vulnerability or intimacy that was expected of someone.
I know exactly the moment you're talking about. And it did strike me, and I do applaud that person for being as game as they were. I am a person who generally doesn't love audience participation. I don't know if that's my personality or if it's just because I have so much experience like being in the room observing as a critic, and there's a whole other thing running in your head, But Yeah, it's like really a moment that goes there with that vulnerability, and there's a sense of like very physical closeness witnessed by so many people. And yeah, it's a lot.
But as I was talking earlier about wanting characters and conflict, like it is a way to sort of imbue that, right? You have to bring something else on the stage to at least like, for that tension.
Yeah, and that's sort of modeling a time in her life when there really is just a huge amount of questioning and tension and fear, and having that person in the scene who she just, pulled from the audience and he doesn't know what's going on. And it heightens that feeling that she's getting at, about that feeling of questioning, like, well, where is this going?
I think the show is totally worth seeing. I really enjoyed it. It's another show that's been around for Fringes.
I reviewed it several years ago.
Amazing.
So I enjoyed seeing that, the evolution, particularly at the end of the show.
It won Best Newcomer at Edinburgh Fringe, is going back at a bigger venue. Great for Philadelphia, great for Kelly.
Yeah.
I want to say it is definitely on the spicier end of the three shows. All three have a sort of naughty tones to all of them, but this one felt like the most like B game for sexy body burlesque.
Yeah, which I loved, but that definitely is like a good thing to know before you go into the show. Okay, so let's land on Good Person. This is, I believe, a new show from Brett Ashley Robinson, who is an actor that I have loved watching over the last couple of years, especially in shows like The Wilma. She's also a director. What comes up for you with this one? Do you want to describe kind of what the concept of the show?
I will do my very best.
Okay.
This is the one I have no idea how to give an elevator pitch for this one.
Sure.
And it was probably easy my favorite of the three. And I think maybe because it's probably the newest and the most sort of like, it felt like really stuff was getting worked out.
Yeah.
So Brett is an African-American actress. And she is playing a white woman, Paulette.
Patricia.
He's playing a white woman, Patricia. She enters the stage in sort of like a garbage bag and emerges in like a very short sort of like jacket,
like a twin set, like a skirt and cardigan set,
and with like a white face, but shockingly sort of zombie ghost pallid white, and that's the costume and the makeup. And she has this sort of like affected Southern accent, and is this sort of bizarre, uncanny children's show host / like YouTube guru. There's something very brownish about the performance, and like unsettling, and I also found it empathetic. And it's sort of her as this character, Patricia, telling us like how to live a good life. And acknowledging the ways in which white people try and maybe fail to make space outside their experiences. But I also think empathizing with how hard that is, and the weirdness, and the ways in which what we're told to do, EI initiatives or corporate diversifying or land acknowledgements, don't always get us there. But there's a value in trying. I think it's a show that I'm going to be like, I don't know if I have the takeaways. I think it's a show that I would benefit from seeing again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And not for the show having a lack of something to say. I think that the show has lots to say, and I think it's actually just not in a neat, tidy bow. And I think it's sort of like you're going to take away what you are going to take away, but it felt very generous in how much it was sort of bringing up.
Yeah, and I appreciated how much it varied in tone. There's some parts that are wildly funny and intimate, and other parts that are very weird and distancing, and that are just sort of strange and uncomfortable to sit through. I think there were a couple threads for me that I was really interested in. One is this characterization of the sympathetic liberal white woman, right? Like obviously I'm sitting in the show here as a white woman. I think that Brett lands so aptly on this syndrome of focusing on our individual feelings and our individual powers and our individual work to be nicer and feel better and show more love, and won't the world be better if we all just individually, get up and do that work for ourselves and show some love. And the reality is that these are horrific systemic problems, and no amount of, having a little bit more love personally is going to end these problems. And it sort of reflects critiques of books like White Fragility, which ostensibly are about recognizing and fighting racism, but having done lots of reading in that space, it seems to me that they almost become, and I'm not the first person to voice this. Lots of other critics before are saying that it's almost like it becomes like a self-improvement project for white people versus some kind of systemic change. Yeah. And I feel like that's part of what Brett's digging into. And no spoilers, but there's a really interesting, powerful kind of final piece that I think she really digs into and lands with us. And the message to me was this idea about how kind of allergic we are about sitting in the present time. It's always about looking back into the past, or if we are doing something in the present, it's not about the present, it's about a narrative we're making that we'll be able to share in the future. Mm-hmm. That's going to make everyone forget the injustices that we're perpetrating right now. So that landed hard with me. I went to love.
Yeah, I did too. This one also had tone shifts. I think she did them in such a way they felt very bookended. I'm wondering, I sort of did you see Fairview?
Yes.
Okay. This idea of theater in Philadelphia being very white, like the audiences are very, very white. I'm curious, about how Brett portraying whiteness allows the white audience to project clownishness on her. There's a moment in the show where we all have bits of balled up newspaper and are throwing them at her, and then she turns around and screams, and it's it's funny, it's a joke, and everyone was game. I was so game. It was so funny. It really worked as a weird, surreal comedic thing. And in my mind, there is no way that the liberal-leaning theater audience of white Philadelphia would have been comfortable doing that were she not in this role. And how the white face or the white performance allowed her to access a kind of clownishness that surpassed the racial respectable politeness that we're all hearing right now, in a way that I was just fascinated by. And I'm I'm positive that she was aware of how that was happening, but I did it. And I was funny. I was like, oh my God, me and a bunch of white people threw a balled up newspaper at this woman and laughed about it at her direction, at her point. But I just could never imagine that being done in the same tone without the very specific decisions that she's making. I was really struck by that.
Yeah, and I just think overall, if she knocks the show again, I will run to get tickets and see it again and marinate more in this and see how it develops. I think that out of the 3 shows, it definitely landed the most raw.
Yeah.
The other 2 shows definitely, for all the ways that they're weird and messy, they have a very practiced, polished element to them. And this one feels different. It might be the subject matter. It might be that it's a newer show. But yeah, it has an interesting raw feeling. Shall we kind of get into a wrap up?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Discussion. I have 2 things that I think are interesting. So as we're getting into our wrap up and looking back on seeing these 3 shows, I think one thing that was super interesting for me was that the first night we go into the Johnny Depp show, which is the show about, a famous person, but it's also about a system, those bigger systemic problems and pressures in our life and how they manifest. And then we get to the second show and We're getting more specific. This is a show about specific regular person. Mm-hmm. And then we get to the final show, and a lot of it feels like, this is me. The artist is challenging stuff in me, and it's stuff that I need to sit with. And I thought that was kind of a cool arc to go through. Do you have thoughts about that?
I think there's a lot of arcs. I think it went from shows that have been germinating for long, medium, short time. I thought that was very cool. I thought they're all sort of about vulnerability and flawed people, and in different ways, sexism and womanhood and sexuality. I hadn't thought about sort of that. I do really like it. I do think it goes narrowing in. I think the order we saw it, the shows got better and more interesting as we went, which feels like a little harsh to say, but I think fair to my experience.
This is what we do. We come in and tell the truth about what our experience was.
I think also showing 3 very different artistic practices. I think there's something really interesting about how all 3 performers use the space, the exact same space, right? Yeah. All 3 performers engage with the audience, but in different ways.
Yeah, and with minimal setting elements and props.
Yeah. So I think seeing the 3 was really helpful and great in how it, I think it brought out the sort of, when you're coffee tasting or wine tasting, and having things to compare it to allows each one to sort of well, maybe I didn't love all of Johnny Depp as much. And seeing it in the context of the 3 of them, I really appreciate how Jenna made repeating bits and brought that sort of full circle and used props really effectively. And
I really respect her as an artist. I think it's really interesting work.
Versus Brett, who never engaged with us as anyone but Patricia and had total wide artifice on at all times, was able to take us to sort of some really crazy places, versus Kelly, who was so fiercely vulnerable. All those really able to appreciate all 3 for what they brought.
Yeah. And I think one more thing which would be cool to land on for us, especially as critics, we're not used to being in a space together, right? We might be alone, we might be someone who's not a critic. It's kind of fun to watch the show with another critic. And I think it was really interesting because when we sat down together on the first night, you were remembering a conversation you had closer to the beginning with your career with the veteran theater critic who kind of took you to school about how a theater critic, should look and behave. And it really was tapping into this sort of feeling for me that I've noticed and kind of wrestled with through my career, of this idea that theater critics should kind of go and be there, and we're just kind of stony. We're just sit there, we don't react, we take it in, we don't join a standing ovation or, things like that. So we're critics, we're coming into this setting, really intimate settings for shows that are built on audience interaction. And the way these shows are set up and with the intimacy of the venue, nobody gets away from some kind of interaction. And so I'm just interested in your feelings as a critic. How does it feel for you to be in the space, reviewing the show, but also participating in the show as the artist asks you to?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as an audience member in general, I'm game. I think as a critic, I do feel like I pulled back a little bit. I am a theater boy through and through. If I can still focus, I will still focus. And so I feel like that as a critic, that is absolutely the worst thing I can do, right? I am there to observe and see. I want to make it as little about me as possible.
No critic wants to, draw attention to your self. Don't talk to me. I'm working.
All right. Well, I also don't want to be like that. We mentioned it. There was a really bad heckler at Johnny Depp.
Yeah. That
is taking audience participation so far. I wouldn't ever be like that, but I don't think my audience persona and my critic persona are so super similar, which is actually why last year I intentionally decided to not get press tickets for Margaritaville. I paid for them because I was like, this is so stupid. I'm going to love this. And I want to love it without any remote feeling that my brain has to be turned on.
Gotcha.
Anyway, I want to drink 2 margaritas at intermission and woohoo! And I have found that it's a different kind of thing. In some ways it is work. In some ways it is I am trying to think of how I'm going to frame this, what I'm going to say. And so I do think it is interesting when a show like this, where I definitely do feel like I am in a slightly different like mindset. Because maybe my day-to-day theater going persona is, I like to think I'm thoughtful, but I'm certainly more vibing out.
I think especially in a situation like this, that as a critic, part of what you're bringing to the audience is like what that experience is, right? Of being in the audience. And so if I'm not participating, I'm not experiencing what the show is. You know, that feeling of like, oh my God, I'm on the spot and I gotta say something, you know? And like that's part of what makes the show. And I think it's that's cool, you know, as a critic to like be there in the moment and do that, and then, you know, incorporate how that feels into how I describe the experience. Is there anything else that you want to land on about these 3 shows?
I think applaud Theater Exile for really giving the resources and stage to 3 very hardworking Philly artists who have really paid their dues and put in the time. And I think it's really great for them all to have a spotlight. I think they're all names that people should follow. I've enjoyed their work in lots of other contexts. And I think, and they're as Philly as you get.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. As we wrap up, I want to make sure to say that if you enjoyed this conversation, you're going to enjoy our webinar, which is coming up on May 29th. This is a Wednesday night. The webinar is called Bad Reviews, How to Write Them and Why We Need Them. It's happening on Zoom, and yes, it will be recorded. So if you're not free the night of, register. You can get a recording of it to watch whenever you want. But we're going to have a Q&A in the session with a theater critic, Cameron Kelsall, who has come up in this discussion. So come to the session, learn about how critics works. If you're an artist, you are also invited to the conversation. We have a discount code for you. Get in touch. And if you're a reader and arts lover and you want to understand more about how we work at BSR, we're all about how we can make the work of arts journalists more transparent and help those understand what we're doing, and talk about why honest criticism is really important, even though some folks would say it's not, and what that toolbox is for writers who want to get more into it. So this is our webinar. It's coming up May 29th at 6:30 p.m. And you can head to our Instagram account. We have a link in bio to register. We also are sharing through our newsletters. Head to broadstreetreview.com to subscribe. And we would love to see you there. So Josh, we had been working together, for a couple of years before we actually met in person and sat down together in the theater.
So I feel like you're one of the family now. So
I know, right?
It's really great. Thank you for having me and letting us do this. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for coming on this journey with us. And we hope that folks listening along enjoy the conversation. And we hope you get tickets for the final weekend of these shows.
Absolutely.
Thank you to our guest hosts, Alaina Johns and Josh Herron, for joining us on today's podcast. The Broad Street Review podcast is an Emory production. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, visit us online at em3ry.com. Get involved with Broad Street Review. Head on over to our website at www.broadstreetreview.com and click Get Involved at the top. While you're there, help keep us running and click Donate to find out how. There you can also find our social media links. Thank you for your part in keeping the conversation going.